We've talked about various aspects of late 19th century or Gilded Age urbanization. I now want to spend some time, a number of lectures, talking about the urban culture that emerged, because this urbanized culture that emerged in America in the Gilded Age is the culture we live in today. This is when America became the America that we know. And one aspect of that was the middle class culture was beginning to be very powerful in the late 19th century. Prior to modernity, the middle class was tiny, but the middle class was still small, but it was growing in number, in part because of corporations and middle managers, in part because professionals were growing. And with this growing middle class was the rise of a new urban consumer culture. One of the most important aspects of this new urban culture was the rise of mass consumption. In addition to new affordable products, there were also new merchandising techniques that made them much more broadly offered. Let's talk about a couple of the products first. Ready-made clothing. The need for a huge number of uniforms in the Civil War spurred an industry producing ready-made clothing. What I mean by ready-made is clothes you go and you buy your size. That was a fairly new innovation. Prior to modernity, you didn't go buy a size 10 or a 33-inch waist pair of pants. You had a pair of pants made. But now we had sizes and stuff you could buy right off the rack. And after the Civil War, this exploded. And what it meant was that style emerged as a concern of a much broader group. By the end of the 19th century, almost all clothes were ready-made, store-bought clothes. Another revolution that occurred was the way people bought food. The innovation of tin cans, refrigerated railroad cars, artificially frozen ice, and ice boxes led to a dramatic change in the way people bought and prepared food. It led to much bigger and broader, better diets, and those diets, in part, led life expectancy to rise 6 years from 1900 to 1920. Here we see an old ice box in the middle, so-called ice box because it didn't have electricity yet. We simply put a big chunk of ice in it to keep stuff cold. Where'd you get the ice? Well, the Iceman came around and would sell ice to you every few days. We see some early or some late Gilded Age canned soups. These things were big innovations, and it dramatically increased what people could eat. Now, the clothing and the food were innovative products, but the merchandising delivery methods also innovated substantially to deliver those products. And we see the emergence of great department stores. This started in Europe, but America jumped on board quickly, and these huge urban department stores arose, and we see shopping. Shopping is created for the first time as a leisure activity. Marshall Field's was the great store in Chicago, and Macy's, of course, in New York. Macy's was opened in 1858, but it was moved in 1902 to its flagship Herald Square location, and that's the flagship store still for Macy's, and it bills itself as the world's largest store. I've been in it, and you can buy anything there. It's not like a normal Macy's at the mall. It's amazing. Mail order also exploded in the Gilded Age. Now, it wasn't invented in the Gilded Age. According to the National Mail Order Association, Benjamin Franklin is believed to have been the first cataloger in the United States. In 1744, he published a catalog which sold scientific and academic books. But it didn't really take off in a major way until the Gilded Age. In part, railroad expansion made it possible for you to send the goods to these far-flung places, because there were people, those homesteaders and people out in the West, they wanted to partake in this urban mass culture too, and they could through a catalog. Aaron Montgomery Ward is credited with sending out his first mail order catalog in 1872 for his Montgomery Ward mail order business. This business lasted well into my lifetime. The first catalog was a single sheet of paper with a price list, 8 by 12 inches, showing the merchandise for sale and ordering instructions. And Montgomery Ward identified a market of merchant-wary farmers in the Midwest, and within 2 decades, his single-page list of products grew into a 540-page illustrated book, like a phone book, if you even know what those are anymore, selling over 20,000 items, wildly popular. Sears Roebuck followed. They, until not that many years ago, produced a giant Christmas catalog every year that kids were always excited to get. Mail order, obviously, or mail order catalogs have been eclipsed by the internet, but the concept is the same, and it was invented in the Gilded Age. One interesting aspect of this mass consumption culture was that, sort of inadvertently, it allowed women to become more powerful. We're going to be talking about the increasing visibility and role of women throughout the Gilded Age and beyond in the 20th century. And women were the primary consumers in this new consumer culture. They bought the clothes, they bought the food for their families. They also began to dominate the new jobs as retail workers, a way for women to have a semi-professional job in the retail business. And so they began to organize themselves into consumer protection movements. This woman, Florence Kelley, was the first Secretary General of an organization called the National Consumers League. It was formed in the 1890s, and the idea was to use the power of women as consumers to improve wages and working conditions. If the women are buying the goods, then they should have some power with the companies. Florence Kelley was a reformer. She advocated all kind of things. She worked to improve wages and working conditions, but she also worked hard to get suffrage for women, the women's vote. She also was one of the founders of the NAACP, but she's most famous as the first leader of the National Consumers League. Women using their power as consumers to effect progressive change. Much more about that later.